talking about safety nets, and Neera, I want to get you to come in on that as well, but just a quick point from you, Shuchin, before I get Neera back in. Since we're talking about safety nets and we are talking about what the government can do, Ayushman Bharat, for instance, marquee scheme of the government, it is up for review. Vinod Paul committee has been set up by the government to review the Ayushman Bharat scheme. What do you believe needs to be done to recalibrate it, if at all, today? People question the reimbursement rates, for instance. What do you think can be done to make it more robust?
Shirin, we've been the champions of Ayushman Bharat ever since it was launched. We did the first cardiac procedure in the country under Ayushman. The first angioplasty was done at our hospitals. Out of the first 10 hospitals recognized and rewarded by the government, 4 were ours. Unfortunately, the issue still remains, as in all PPP partnerships. This is a PPP partnership, right? The government is always wary and suspicious of the private healthcare or the private providers. The private providers are always wary that the government does it really mean what it's saying on the big diocese. Payments are delayed due to those suspicions only. There's lots of issues between the rates that the private healthcare expects and the rates that the government wants to give. Even if we are ready to work at these rates, it's a very low margin, high volume business. So, but if you're earning less than 10% margins on those low rates, if the payments come in a year later, then you cannot, hope to earn any money out of it. And that is why hospitals stop these services off and on. So like, for example, in Haryana, all private hospitals stopped Ayushman services for a couple of days because their payments had been due for more than 1.5, 2 years. So if they can, they've announced the green channel, but if they can implement it on the ground,
Neera, just on the point of PPP and models that have worked, but as Shuchin was also pointing out, execution gaps remain. And to Ashish's point about collaboration, of the 23,000 in FY23 of CSR money and that available pool of capital, everyone wants to do a little bit of education, everyone wants to do a little bit of healthcare, but how do you get education or healthcare at scale using that capital through the power of collaboration?
So in fact, in our report, we talk quite a lot about we're seeing an increase in collaboration and having more pooled funds alongside with government could accelerate a little bit more innovation. But the challenge, Shireen, is not about is it education or is it health. For example, 12 years we've been running a collaborative for adolescent girls. You can't just chop her into pieces and be like, here's education, here's health. You have to work on sort of outcomes that might be keeping her in school, making sure she's not getting pregnant, not getting married, and is employability, which brings me to, we can have as many hospitals and education and even businesses, but our biggest challenge is actually smoothing this income for a bulk of the country, right? Income is just so choppy that if there's some way to smooth that with policies, with schemes, with additional support, because then you're going to get really that engine for our economic growth. And the biggest challenge, honestly, that we've seen is for girls and women and the most vulnerable. So they often get invisible. They often don't get reached out to. And that's where philanthropy plays a role. And that's where collaboratives with philanthropy and pooled capital needs to go to the aspirational districts. It needs to go to the most vulnerable because they need products and services to be subsidized ultimately.
Yeah, Ashish, the Niti Aayog and Amitabh Kant set up that 100 aspirational districts with a clear focus of being able to try and address the vulnerable. But outside of that, if I were to ask you to prioritize, and we were just talking about this, prioritizing growth, but more importantly, equitable growth, job-creating growth, what is it that you would like to see now in terms of policy changes, policy interventions?
Yeah, so I think at the end of the day, whatever philanthropy does will be very small. The state needs to come up with policies and crowd in private capital to make it happen. And we need to focus on labor-intensive growth. We need to prioritize sectors where lots of jobs get created. So I would say a few things. One is the investment to GDP has already gone up, public investment. It needs to go up further because we need much better infrastructure in order to be competitive from a manufacturing standpoint. Two is we need more industrial incentive. We have PLI, which is a good start. I think we need an ELI, employment-linked incentive, particularly for, and we need to pick sectors like garments, like woodwork, furniture making, toys, all the labor-intensive sectors which create lots of jobs and provide the right set of incentives for people to kickstart companies in those areas and to grow them. Third is we need an exports mission. Because China captured anywhere from 30 to 50% global market share in all labor-intensive manufacturing from an export standpoint. This is a golden opportunity for India because China is blacklisted now, and this will yield huge results in terms of job creation. So my focus would be more on how does one accelerate growth, but accelerate growth in a manner that actually creates lots of jobs, because that's ultimately the way out of poverty. It's ultimately the way to reduce the Gini index as well, and so therefore reduce inequity.
So not just PLI, but an ELI as well. And that's, of course, been on the table. Let's see whether the government moves forward. Yeah, Neera.
I want to make a plug, Shireen, for the care economy. I think it can create jobs and it can really, really help women.
No, you have my vote on that already. We need much more of the care economy, and that will unlock the potential for women to participate in the economy across the formal as well as the informal sector. But Vineet, I want to talk to you about one of the big ideas that you've, of course, also been involved with, the social stock exchange. And India has seen the first listing on the social stock exchange. Take me through what you hope this will do for some of these issues that we've spoken about and for the idea behind impact investors and impact investing.
So I think social stock exchange is more on the philanthropy side. So while I was one of the architects, but it's actually worked more for Neera than for me. Having said that, I think what it does is brings the more important parts of transparency and regulation and allowing people or encouraging people to do more philanthropy. I think for social stock exchange, while CSR and other things are already there, maybe we should actually allow temples to invest. And I know there is actually, the amount of money that is lying in the temples is actually worthy to go through social stock exchange into the projects that's listed. So Neera, for you, please do look at it. I am very sure the current government is actually thinking on that line, so do not forget that.
Thinking of being able to monetize what's lying with temples?
Yeah, and it's actually global. I have actually gone to Vatican and tried to take money out of them. I realize they don't have much money, but so I've tried everything. But Indian temples are very important. So I think we should use the money productively because the amount of hundi that they receive is significant and make a big difference, probably more than what we do on the CSR. But if you have to look on the equalization side, on the commercial side, then like carbon credits, where you are pretty much actually trading the arbitrage for growing trees, I think we need to evolve an impact coin. This is actually to address Shuchin's. See, there is no way I will do a startup in Samastipur in Bihar, which I have done, unfortunately. I will generate a 25% IRR and compete with Rajan Anandan of Peak 15. It's not going to happen. Unfortunately, whatever I do, as an impact investor, I'll do all stupid things. But when I go to the LP, they ask the same returns.
Yeah.
Now, you don't need to be a rocket scientist to understand Samastipur will always be far behind an IIT graduate in Delhi. Or gaming, a guy in gaming will actually win against a warehousing company. So an impact coin could actually work for Shuchin, work for me, to push capital to generate returns and then get compensated. And that can come from the government. So impact coin is actually the way for the government to think about in creating an equalization for those places where there is going to be a struggle to create value.
Well, we've got three concrete ideas. Ashish, Vineet, and Neera putting three concrete ideas for the next government to consider. Shuchin, what are you putting down on that list for the next government to consider?
Yeah, I think I agree that we need to add another P to the PPP. So it's public-private philanthropy partnerships that we need to make instead of just the public-private partnerships.
Each of you have very carefully articulated what the road ahead looks like. It requires all stakeholders to be at the table, and it requires all of us to collectively put our hands together to ensure that we bridge some of these very crucial gaps and inequities. Ladies and gentlemen, a big round of applause to this panel talking about creating an equitable future for India. Appreciate your time and appreciate your insights. Thank you very much for joining us today.